8,000 years ago, a tsunami passed through this sea. When it reached land, it wiped out miles of this coast and the lives of thousands of people who lived here. In this film, we uncover extraordinary evidence from this horrific moment in our past. Scientists reveal the single earth-shattering event that caused the tsunami. And at one of Britain's richest Stone Age sites, we discover the complex society that lay right in its path. 9,000-year-old finds offer rare glimpses into those people's sophisticated lifestyle and their spiritual beliefs.
These are holy objects in the Mesolithic, aren't they?
They are. They're just so incredibly rare.
The tsunami was the most dramatic incident in a long and volatile epoch. One that would drown a Stone Age world in the heart of Europe. This was one of the most defining eras in our history, making Britain an island. Now we can tell the whole story of this disaster that time forgot. To piece together the story of the Stone Age tsunami, you have to go back not just 8,000 years, but 12,000 to the end of the last ice age. This was 7 millennia before the Egyptians built their first pyramid, or our ancestors created Stonehenge. Glaciers still covered much of the northern hemisphere, but they were starting to melt. The planet was warming. This period of rapid climate change would transform Britain, and in the midst of this volatile time in our prehistory came a catastrophic event. A tsunami hitting the shores of Britain sounds like something out of a disaster movie, doesn't it? A work of fiction that couldn't possibly happen. But it did happen, and it was a long time ago, and there's compelling evidence to prove it. Experts are now certain that Montrose Basin on Scotland's east coast was once a tsunami disaster zone. But the clues that tell us we're in the right place are tiny and rather ordinary, except to the highly trained eye.
Right, well, what we can see here with a curious layer about halfway down, which I think you can just about see.
Oh, I can see it very clearly. You mean this sort of orangey-brown band?
It signifies an unusual event that took place whilst this clay and silt was being laid down. Now that is the deposit of the tsunami.
So all this brown stuff, this is all sand, yeah?
That's right.
Oh, yeah, it's very coarse, isn't it?
It is.
Now, why do you think that that is from a tsunami rather than any other kind of event, flooding or something?
These clays and silts have been deposited over a period of probably 2,000 years or more, and yet there's only one single layer of sand within them, so it's unique.
But even the trained eye needs a microscope to see the clues in the sand, evidence that reveals the full power of the killer wave.
And we found that the diatoms, the little microorganisms which live in a marine environment, or can do so, are often broken and eroded as if they've been bashed about a lot by waves.
So that means that whatever this is, it came from the sea and there was a great deal of force and tumble to get it here.
Correct.
The pulverised microscopic sea creatures mixed in with the sand are a clear indication of the immense power of the surge that must have reached up to 3 miles inland. It is quite extraordinary, isn't it, that we can get so much information about a cataclysmic event that took place so long ago just from a little line of sand in the mud.
Absolutely, and we can say something about its age quite precisely. The radiocarbon dates tell us that it's about 8,100 years old, and the cherry stones, which we can find here and there in the sand, would have been laid down in the autumn.
This is a remarkable clue to have survived. Wild cherries only fruit and fall in autumn. The stones mixed in with the tsunami deposit mean it can be pinned down to that time of year. Once scientists could spot the evidence the tsunami had left behind, they could begin to appreciate its sheer scale. The same sand crops up at 34 other locations from the Shetland Isles to Northumbria. This was an awe-inspiring event, one which devastated nearly 400 miles of our prehistoric coast. But even with the knowledge of when and where the disaster hit, it's still a huge challenge to find any traces of the people who might have been caught up in the ancient catastrophe. This was 8,000 years ago, a time just after the last ice age, before people in Britain had started farming. It's around 6000 BC, in an era known as the Middle Stone Age or Mesolithic. It's one of the least understood periods in our prehistory, and it still puzzles archaeologists, even today. There is, though, one crucial Mesolithic site which is beginning to answer those questions. It's in Yorkshire, and it's called Storegga. For the first time, we're piecing together a picture of life in Britain around the time of the tsunami. I've never been here before, but I'm really excited about it. A lot of archaeologists say that Storegga is to the Mesolithic what Stonehenge is to 3000 BC. In other words, you've got to come here if you want to see the big picture. Ever since the site's discovery, finds from Storegga have been challenging our fundamental assumptions about how our Stone Age ancestors lived. We've always thought of Stone Age people as hunter-gatherers living a nomadic life, primitive and precarious. But Storegga is revealing the existence of a much more advanced and complex society back in Mesolithic Britain. The latest Stone Age explorer here is Nikki Milner. Hi, Nikki.
Hello.
Thanks for letting me come on site.
Pleasure.
What's the big deal about Storegga? Why is it that people get so excited about it?
We don't know much about the Mesolithic, and it has such an amazing array of finds, and because it's part of a great lake complex with lots of sites all around here.
So we're not just talking about one site, we're talking about a whole landscape.
That's right, you have to imagine a great body of water all around us here.
How do you know that there's a lake here?
We know because we have all this peat in the section there, all that black earth, and that actually infilled the lake and became what we call now Paleo Lake Flixton.
10,000 years ago, a shallow lake formed in this valley. Traces of people living here have turned up at 24 different sites, all on what was then the lake shore. Over time, the lake filled up with reeds and vegetation, plants that break down to form peat. It's this peat that holds clues to the Mesolithic past. Does the peat help or hinder the protection of the finds?
Now, it's a massive help because it stops oxygen getting into the archaeology and stops deterioration. So we actually have preservation of antler, wood, bone. In fact, we've even got some bone. Yes, that's it.
Here?
It's a horse jaw.
Fantastic.
Which is quite massive.
Yeah. As well as the bones from animals hunted by Mesolithic people, hundreds of spearheads made from antler and wood have turned up, plus the remains of red deer, boar, and other wild animals. See, this is really weird for me because normally if I'm looking at a site of this kind of date, all I'm ever shown is flints.
That's right, that's usually what there only is, and that's why this is so important. It's because the peat is here, it preserves all these amazing artefacts, and we learn so much more about how people were living from the bone and antler and the wood.
The sheer quantity of finds emerging from this one site paint a detailed picture of an astonishingly rich lifestyle. One that seems to have continued largely unchanged for millennia. It's that society which would be devastated by a tsunami. But back then, Britain was a very different place. If the inhabitants of Storegga had travelled 20 miles to these cliffs, their view east wouldn't have been anything like the one we see today. What Stone Age people would have seen from up here wasn't the sea, it would have been a great low-lying landscape, a plain, part of a landmass so huge it was virtually another European country, stretching all the way from me right across to Germany. And we call this drowned world Doggerland. Doggerland was once inhabited. It was probably a place much like Storegga, and it seems a more complex, fascinating place than we've previously imagined. "8,000 years ago, a massive tsunami hit Britain's east coast. It would cause untold devastation. Most vulnerable to this tsunami was Doggerland, that lay at the heart of Mesolithic Europe. Today, Dogger Bank, which gives Doggerland its name, is an underwater sandbank. Back in the Stone Age, it lay above sea level. And Doggerland was no empty wilderness. Fishing trawlers frequently drag up prehistoric animal bones and human-worked tools from the seabed. Archaeology suggests that right in the tsunami's path lay Stone Age settlements. But to understand what this place was really like, you need to be able to explore every detail of the seabed. This is exactly what a team from Birmingham University succeeded in doing. Using 2,000 square miles of oil company surveys, they've mapped what looks like an alien terrain. Vince, you know what this reminds me of? One of those pictures of the surface of Mars.
Yeah, the red planet. Well, it's not quite like that, and it wasn't like that in the past. There's a lot more water here. It is, in fact, a foreign country. What you're looking at is one of our first maps of rivers which flow underneath the North Sea. This white line, the snakes across the landscape, is a meandering river, and into it you've got a whole series of smaller streams.
The things like...
Absolutely, yes. Some of them are white, some of them change colour because of the underlying geology, but you can see they're tributaries. You don't have to be a geographer to spot that sort of thing.
This is only a small bit of the North Sea, isn't it? Have you managed to create a picture of what the whole area would have looked like?
Flat. But actually, it was like this. It was flat, but indeed, it was not featureless. We've got thousands of kilometres of cross-cutting channels, small islands, perhaps slightly larger islands upon which people lived, but the most dramatic features right in the centre here. This is a marine depression, but 12,000 years ago, this would have been a massive lake into which most of these rivers would have flowed.
Doggerland was a vast European delta the size of Germany. And from plant remains found in North Sea sediments, Vince's team have got some idea what it would have been like to live there.
What that's showing us is that Doggerland is a very lush place to live. In the rivers we have reed beds, we have deciduous woodland. Hazel, we think, is a very important component of this woodland. Oak and elm as well. And this is a landscape that's full of resources. It's a fantastic place to live.
This was a Mesolithic land of plenty, home to thousands of people who could enjoy its estuaries, lakes and lowlands. Many of the finds from the peaty soil of Storegga show that these Mesolithic people weren't, as we once thought, primitive nomads scraping along as hunter-gatherers. And it was a sensational discovery in 2010 that completed this new picture.
It was a really interesting area because it was very different from everywhere else. It was darker in colour, and when we were digging it, flints were just popping out all over the place. It was very, very dense. And when we dug into it, we found that there was a sort of depression in the ground, which was about 3 metres across and 20 centimetres deep. And it was full of this very dark soil, which was presumably something organic, a bit like reeds. And then around about it, there were 18 post holes. And we suddenly realised that we had something really important here.
So what was it?
It was a structure. It's a house.
Somewhere people actually lived.
That's right,
That's
yes.
extraordinary, isn't it? Because up until then, people had thought that in Mesolithic times, people didn't have permanent homes. They wandered around, they were hunter-gatherers.
That's right. People tend to believe that people were moving around the landscape in very small groups and not settling anywhere. And we think from the archaeology we've got, this shows that it's something different, that they're actually building very substantial houses.
So what do you imagine this house looked like?
Well, it would be about 4 metres across, and it would be over 6 foot tall, and some kind of tent-like shape, probably, with an opening, a doorway somewhere around it as well.
Is it fair to say it was a glorified bivouac?
No, it's something much more substantial than that. It is a house.
A house that's 10,500 years old. This makes it the earliest house ever found in Britain. And what's more, radiocarbon dates revealed it had been lived in for between 200 and 500 years. What's remarkable about this is that it implies that there were people who were born here, brought up here, maybe spent their whole lives here and would have identified with this land.
Yes, and quite possibly we have generations living in this house.
So this was a find of international importance.
That's right, yes. It changes the way we see hunter-gatherers.
It's the most surprising aspect of Mesolithic life that's emerged at Storegga. People weren't just passing through Lake Flixton, they were settling here. And it's likely they also settled on the doomed shorelines of Doggerland in the path of a future tsunami. To understand the kind of life Stone Age people might have led in this threatened world, Time Team's Alex Langlands has met up with experimental archaeologist Jackie Wood.
What we've got here is prime Mesolithic real estate. You're by the lake, so animals need to get the water, so they're coming to the lake, so you don't have to go and hunt them in the dense forest. Just wait here and they'll come to you.
Yes.
And also the best vegetation for eating, as well as the fish.
So that water is absolutely fundamental to the Mesolithic way of life.
Totally, and it's their mode of transport. They can get right through. It's easier to go along the river than through the forest.
It all makes sense.
Absolutely.
People surrounded themselves with the resources they needed to live well, and their tools marked out the Mesolithic as a time of finely crafted gadgets, more advanced than anything that had gone before. The originals are rare and fragile, but we can discover exactly how they worked by testing some replicas.
Jackie, you've got a fantastic array of tools here. Talk me through some of them.
And this is your Mesolithic toolkit, basically, your everyday things you'd need.
Okay.
And one of the most vital tools in prehistory, and particularly in the Mesolithic, is a bone needle.
Okay.
And this would be actually to drill the hole out.
It allows you to make that hole.
Makes the hole, yeah.
Okay. So that's an awl.
That's an awl.
Right.
This is like a kind of spoke shaver. This is how you get the sort of nice rounded needle edge. And this one here is actually your saw. You see that really fine edge on it, and that's how you'd saw it out of the actual bone. You saw it out first. I've done quite a bit of research on this, and it takes about 4 hours to make a bone needle from scratch.
But you've got all the tools for the job. So there's a lot of things that we don't know, but at the same time, we can reconstruct the tools and then have a go at these things ourselves.
With them, Mesolithic people made fishing nets, clothes, even log boats for getting about. These finds paint a picture of remarkably sophisticated settlements which would have been completely wiped out by a tsunami. Phil's visiting York University to see one more crucial discovery, one which appears to show that people weren't just living side by side, but working together.
Nicky, I've been drooling and dribbling over these timbers ever since I saw you unpacking them. They're just phenomenal pieces of wood. Being a really boring archaeologist, what's their context? Where do they come from?
They come from right on the edge of the lake, so they would have been just underwater.
But the important thing is they are part of a structure.
That's right, yes. I mean, you have to imagine they're on the lake, but they're all laid out close to each other in the same direction, so presumably to stabilise the muds. And that stretches over an area of 30 metres and was probably some kind of platform going out into the water.
What they'd uncovered was the equivalent of a Stone Age slipway. It made the muddy banks accessible and was probably a place to dock boats.
To undertake a construction of this sort is a major piece of civil engineering. It takes time and it takes a lot of people.
These aren't just natural pieces of timber as well, they have actually been worked, so they have been split and hewn. So you can see with this one, for instance, it's rounded there, but it's flat at the bottom.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but these are planks out of an enormous tree. You've got to chop that tree down and then you're splitting it to make it into, well, virtual planks.
It's basically the earliest form of carpentry that we know of.
That is what makes this so important. The sheer fact that it is the birth of carpentry, the birth of woodworking. And I mean, the crucial thing too, it's not just the undertaking, the concept of building something like this, it's that organisation that goes into it, the population, the people that you need to actually organise things and keep the day-to-day routine of the village going on at the same time.
Nikki believes it took a thriving, organised community sharing their woodworking know-how to build a slipway on this scale. And there's an unusual vantage point just near Storegga that'll help her and Phil get a better idea of what that community may have looked like in its heyday. But boy, does it stink.
I should think when the wind is in the right direction, you get this sort of sweet smell of refuse wafting over your trench. I mean,
I promise you that you'll get a good view of the landscape when we get over this bit here.
And she's right. At the top of the landfill site, there's a breath of fresh air.
Nikki, I'm beginning to get a really strong impression of just how complicated a lot of these settlements were. Paint me a picture of what Lake Flixton really was like.
Well, that's what's so nice about this, because we get the whole picture of the landscape here. And if you look right down in the valley there, all those green fields are basically the Lake Flixton. You also have to imagine about 25 sites all around the lake, which were their settlements.
So this really is very typical of what we might have seen on Doggerland.
Yeah, I think we can use this as an analogy with lakes and rivers and vegetation and houses and structures and platforms and so on, yes, and hundreds of people living here.
The more we learn about Lake Flixton, the more settled, skilled and at one with their environment Mesolithic people seem to be. And back at the campfire, Alex is discovering a few of their creature comforts.
Where are we going?
Straight down to the side of the fire here.
This isn't just a log, it's part of a 10,000-year-old recipe.
Is that perfect there?
Yep, just get the heat.
That's great. Wow, that's a hot fire, but what have we actually got in that clay then?
Well, what we've got is a whole salmon that is stuffed with burdock leaves to give it some flavour, and wrapped in grasses and then put in some silty clay that's going to bake by the fire.
That sounds absolutely delicious.
Normal Mesolithic food.
Wow, that's going to be ready in how long?
About 2 hours.
But also in the fire, I've noticed we've got some rocks.
Basically, in prehistory, they used stones for heating water and for cooking with. The main thing that a child would learn as a Mesolithic child was what stones to put in the fire and what stones not to.
Right.
Because if you put anything that's not igneous, like granite, volcanic, it blows up.
Because it just shatters.
It just, sedimentary rocks just explode. So you have to know your rocks.
So that's a mistake I probably would have made.
Very important.
Okay.
And we're going to actually heat some water with this.
Take a leather bag.
And drop it in.
Wow. It's like a kettle boiling, isn't it?
It is.
One more?
Yeah.
My word, these are hot. These are hot. In we go again. Whoa, we're not far off a boil there. What are you using this water for? I mean, you're obviously not having a cup of tea, are you?
No, well, we're going to use this actually for washing, basically. And they had a plant, which we found in the pollen record, that was here in the Mesolithic, called soapwort.
Okay.
It's actually got sapiens in the water.
Right.
To actually make a soapy liquid. And actually, museums, sort of top museums, still use this soapwort for very ancient tapestries.
Right.
Because it's a really gentle sort of soap.
That's great. And it is soapy.
Yeah, you can feel it, can't you?
Yeah, see that lava? That's amazing. So, I mean, basically, I've been sat around the campfire. I've just finished gnawing away on a deer bone and I've got grease all over my hands. Yeah. Just come over here.
Dip a stone in lovely clean hands.
Wonderfully clean hands.
Mesolithically clean hands.
Yes.
Remember that salmon? Eat your heart out, Jamie.
I can see the Mesolithic family arguing about which part of the salmon. All of what I've learnt here has made me sort of rethink what we call the Stone Age. That actually you've got all the technology to hand to live a really rather kind of enjoyable lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle I'll also be able to share, thanks to some unusual archaeological work from the team at Birmingham University. They've assembled everything they know about Mesolithic Doggerland into one extraordinary experience.
Tony,
Are you ready for some time traveling?
Oh, yes, please. Bring it on.
I need to set these things up for you.
Okay. Using artificial
Put that
intelligence,
headset on.
they've tested how plants and animals known from the archaeology would have colonised this virtual landscape. That's fantastic.
If you actually put on your headset, you can hear some ambient sound. Could you use this thumb to turn around? And there
I'm
you
in
go.
the village.
Village.
It's a powerful simulation of a lost world.
Okay, you're getting close to a little animal. Can you see it?
Ah! It's a pig. That's pork for dinner, then. Doggerland certainly was a big place. All these thousands of years later, I still can't find my way out. They reckon up to 100,000 Stone Age people lived here, all focused on the coast and the waterways. But there was a major problem. It was right in the path of a tsunami.
If you love Time Team, you can become a Time Team member today. Your membership directly funds excavations like this and helps us make new programmes and so much more. Plus, you'll get ad-free viewing, behind-the-scenes access and a host of other benefits as well. So become a member today.
The catastrophic tsunami that hit the east coast of Britain 8,000 years ago would have swamped the region we now call Doggerland. But Britain was in the throes of global warming. Low-lying Doggerland had been defenceless against the encroaching seas. By the time the tsunami hit in 6100 BC, this landscape was no more than an area of shallow islands. The end of the Ice Age put the planet in a state of major upheaval. It wasn't just that the ice sheets were retreating, but the Earth's crust itself was creaking and uplifting. This massive climate change wasn't just the setting for Britain's Stone Age tsunami, it was the very cause of it. 700 miles to the north, beneath the Norwegian Sea, layers of sand and boulders had built up during the Ice Ages. Their vast weight put pressure on thin muds that lay in between. This produced a dangerous cocktail of sediments lying right on the edge of the continental shelf. Unstable and massive, it was about to give way, and tsunami expert Dave Tappin knows what triggered it.
There was an earthquake, and it shook the seabed, and a huge volume of sediment collapsed. And as it did so, as it flowed down the seabed, it created a wave, tens of meters high.
So this isn't debris that's coming off the land. This is something which all takes place underwater.
Absolutely.
So what is that we can see there?
What we have here is an image, and what it shows us is like a massive scar which was formed when this sediment collapsed.
A 200-mile section of the marine shelf, the size of Iceland, gave way and plunged to the sea floor. The earthquake had set off an underwater landslide of gargantuan proportions. Now known as the Storegga Slide, it tore across the ocean bed for hundreds of miles. But how do we know that the landslip in Norway created the tsunami which caused all the markings on the British landscape? Couldn't they be entirely different phenomena?
It is possible, and it took a lot of science to work it out. What we know is that the Storegga Slide took place about 6,200 years BC, and the sediments, which we've been looking at here, were laid down at the same time. And the correlation is very good, and to a scientist such as myself, it's pretty convincing.
The underwater slide displaced millions of tons of seawater and created a massive wave, a tsunami, that radiated out across the sea. It struck Norway, then Iceland and Greenland, Travelling faster in the deeper water of the Atlantic, it would have reached North America in just 3 hours. Britain's east coast also lay right in the tsunami's path. Mesolithic people would have had no warning of the impending catastrophe. But we can imagine the terror they were about to experience. Our Stone Age tsunami travelled crest first towards Britain's east coast. The vast energy behind a tsunami wave makes it relentless, unstoppable and deadly. As it reached shore, it rose to a height of 10 metres. People in its path were powerless. It couldn't be outrun. Would the amount of damage that it did depend a lot on the topography of the particular piece of land it was going over?
Absolutely. The topography, the flatness of the land or the heights, whether there are valleys, would have made a massive difference. For example, the one we're walking up now, then that would focus the wave and the wave would build and build and build. It would be amazingly destructive.
The Stone Age tsunami must have picked up branches, trees and boulders in its way, stripping the land of vegetation and destroying settlements. The effect of the tsunami on Doggerland and the east coast would have been catastrophic. Finding any direct evidence of the impact on Mesolithic people of such a brief incident 8,000 years ago would seem near impossible. But in Scotland, archaeologists now realise that's exactly what they did find back in 1979 during an excavation beneath Castle Street in Inverness. Phil's joined curator Kate McCulloch to find out more.
It's a lovely medieval town, but of course the crucial thing is that we come to have a look at the site of this Mesolithic campsite.
That's right.
And this is it.
And here we are, right above it. Literally right here.
I mean, the view up here, looking down into the river itself, must have been absolutely superb in the Mesolithic period. It's a perfect location.
So we've got the river directly below us here. Fresh water, navigation. Fantastic. I'd choose it.
And food and water.
Food and water, ideal.
Speaking of which, let's go and have a coffee.
When archaeologists dug here over 30 years ago, they had no idea of the significance of what they'd found. Right on top of the Mesolithic settlement was the same telltale layer of sand found across Scotland. But back then, they had no idea where it came from.
So these are the original photographs from the excavation?
That's right. This is a profile shot of the section at the depth of the tsunami and the Mesolithic horizon. So here we have this very dark, loamy layer. That's the Mesolithic occupation site, and directly above that, the tsunami layer.
And the sheer fact that you've got that relationship with where people were living and the tsunami lying directly on top of it. And I suppose when they actually dug this site, they simply didn't know the importance of the site that they were excavating.
No, the tsunami hadn't been recognised at that time.
So what are the chances of an area in this immediate locality being redeveloped in the short term?
You want to dig it?
I want to dig it!
Whether or not the camp was occupied at the precise moment the tsunami struck, we'll never know. But even if some people survived, the impact of the disaster must have been shocking and lasting.
If you imagine that these people have witnessed a wall of force, a huge wall of water, coming down and wiping out their villages, they would have had a profound change of their views with nature and particularly the sea.
Yeah, I suppose up until then they would have thought of the sea as something beneficent, something that provided them with everything they wanted.
Well, absolutely. It provides food, protection. It's really important.
So how would people have reacted, do you think, emotionally?
There was a tsunami in Papua New Guinea in 1998. The villagers there who were most affected, who lost the children and the old people. The one thing they did is they moved away from the coastline and actually saw the sea as something deeply evil and dangerous.
In the face of such trauma, Britain's Mesolithic people may also have turned their backs on the sea and perhaps looked to their gods for comfort. Storegga provides clues about who those might be. At the University of Cambridge Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, Phil gets the chance to see the site's most strange and sacred objects.
Wow.
These were found in the muds at Storegga. They're made out of red deer skulls, and we think that they were probably used as headdresses.
These are holy objects in the Mesolithic, aren't they?
They are. They're just so incredibly rare, and they give us a completely different insight into the Mesolithic.
I think a reverential doff of the hat and an application of the glasses is called for here.
You can see how much they've been modified, how much they've been changed and chopped about.
They've removed the whole bulk of the antler, but kind of they've kept the spirit of it by just leaving these, like presumably like horns.
They found an extraordinary 21 sets of antler headdresses at Storegga, and all share a similar design. The antlers were broken off and the stumps thinned down. The nose bone removed, while the inner skull was hollowed out. Finally, two mysterious holes were bored into the back of the skull.
One of the things that we're sort of thinking is that they may have used them as shamans as a way of transforming themselves into these animals. They maybe took some kind of hallucinogens, went into a trance, and it's a way of communicating with the spirit world.
I'm sure these people had perhaps a greater sort of spiritual sense than we perhaps give them credit for. Their awareness of their environment, the awareness of the way the sun moved, the moon, the planets, and the rest of it. You can't live in the natural world without having some recall to spirituality. And then, like you say, you have to have some holy man who might actually be able to put you in connection with that spirit world.
These skulls point to a rich Mesolithic culture full of magic and mysticism. Alex and experimental archaeologist Jackie Mulville are determined to work out how the headdresses might have been used and what divine powers they conjured.
The only thing that is slightly perplexing, really, is these holes in the back.
Right.
Okay, so these have been suggested as sort of fake eyes or something to do with wearing them perhaps as masks. But if you're wearing them sort of on the back of your head, you wouldn't be able to see those sort of eye holes.
So this is sort of eyes in the back of the head, is it?
Eyes in the back of the head. Is it that you're looking two ways, you know? Sort of
okay.
Back, front and back? Or could it possibly be that you would wear them sort of the other way, over your face, and it would sort of...
Right, like that?
As a mask.
So I can sort of peer out of my little mask here. So as I'm dancing around the fire, and, you know, do I look particularly horrifying?
You do, actually. You look quite frightening. I think that there's something... You put them on your head.
You think that's a key part of it?
And I mean, they may have had two uses. You may have actually used them to stalk the deer, but also, you know, to become the deer. And maybe, you know, they were part of two different forms of ceremony.
You think these might actually have a practical use in the stalking of deer?
It's all about becoming a deer, to catch a deer, to feed your family.
Maybe the antlers were worn not simply as a disguise, but in the belief that they'd allow the hunter to embody the animal's very soul and to outwit their prey. And from what we know of other cultures, similar skulls were worn to conjure up spirits. Just as this Siberian shaman was doing nearly 10,000 years later in 1692, when he was sketched by a passing explorer. The Stone Age tsunami had been short and sharp, but it was a harbinger of a more permanent devastation that lay ahead. An even greater threat loomed from the melting ice caps, a flood on such a scale that it would destroy Doggerland for good. The Stone Age tsunami that hit the shores of northern Britain and Doggerland in 6100 BC had been a terrible disaster. But after a few hours, the water would have receded. For Doggerland, though, the rising sea levels posed a more enduring threat.
When we look at the rate of sea level rise during the end of the last ice age, actually locked up in those ice sheets is about 120 metres of sea level. And so if you can imagine all of this melting over about a 4,000 year period, you're having a complete change in the landscape.
As each generation went by, Mesolithic people saw more of their land disappear. They'd have to change their way of life and find ingenious new ways to survive. To find out how they did this, Phil's joined archaeologist Martin Bell and his team on a slice of that drowned land that lies in the Severn Estuary in South Wales.
Where exactly are we in the landscape, so to speak?
This was the edge of a former island, which was gradually being buried and encroached by rising sea level and accumulated sediments. And at the time, that low hill would have been surrounded by an oak forest. The River Severn itself would have been right over there, at least 10 kilometres away. And then gradually that whole valley drowned.
And if we were here in the Mesolithic period, we would have been mixing with Mesolithic hunters that would have been operating on this beach.
Yes, living on the edge of the island, actually.
Over 20 years of digging in this Mesolithic hunting ground, Martin's discovered how people might have coped with their shrinking world.
What's so special about this spot?
Well, it's the forest, really. This is part of the oak forest. You can see around us the stumps of various trees poking up from this flat peaty surface. And the extraordinary thing about this tree and a number of others is that there's charcoal scatters around the tree.
Now, hang on, I mean, have we got any other evidence of humans being here?
Yesterday, walking around here, I discovered, first of all, this flint blade here sticking out of the peat, and then right next to it another flint, and then even more exciting from my point of view, charred hazelnut.
And so can we say then that this was a campsite with a campfire?
No, I don't think so. I think the evidence is suggesting that these people were deliberately burning vegetation in order to encourage particular plant resources that they were interested in. The most obvious one, of course, the hazelnuts.
So this, to you, is a prime example of Mesolithic people actually burning, actually creating a landscape. Is that in response to the rising sea level?
Well, a lot of land had been lost, of course. Half the territory of some communities would have been completely lost to the sea. So, in a way, it's logical that they would have intensified the use of the remaining areas of landscape.
It's an astonishing conclusion. These supposedly primitive people appear to have understood that burning vegetation makes soil more fertile and encourages new growth of edible plants. And it turns out they were doing this all over Britain's coasts and in Doggerland. But what do we know about Doggerland's last days? It appears that the final sea level rise that made Britain an island was no gradual inundation. More, a worldwide deluge. What was it that finally cut Britain off from mainland Europe?
We think there was a huge flood about 8,000 years ago which finally split us from Europe. And we have to look to North America to actually see the reason why. There, the ice sheet is still melting and it's building up huge amounts of meltwater in this lake called Lake Agassiz.
Lake Agassiz was a lake that would literally change the world. 163 trillion tonnes of fresh water were being held back by a great ice dam. But as the ice melted, that dam gave way.
And all that water that's been stored pours into the North Atlantic, into the North Sea. You would have seen 2 to 4 metres of sea level rise, which is huge. So literally over a couple of years, you would actually see your distant cousins on the other side of Doggerland suddenly disappear.
At the rate of 5 to 10 million tonnes per second, the lake emptied, flooding coasts across the Northern Hemisphere and drowning Doggerland once and for all. The flood severed Britain's last links to Europe, and we've remained an island ever since. Over time, a new culture would develop, distinct from our continental neighbours, and the trajectory of our history would change irrevocably. Among the events that created the island of Britain after the Ice Age, the tsunami was surely the most dramatic single catastrophe. And in the future, if the planet's gripped in another big freeze, we may well find that history repeats itself.
We've all been confronted over the last 10 years or so with images of the pain and suffering that tsunamis can cause. But they were over the other side of the world. It's hard to imagine that early in human history, people living right here suffered a similar trauma when a tsunami arrived. And even harder to imagine that one day, even though it may be thousands of years in the future, it's almost certain another tsunami will visit this coast, just as one did 8,000 years ago.
Join Time Team on Patreon to access exclusive 3D models, masterclasses and behind-the-scenes insights.